Good morning, folks. Good morning, and welcome to the Message Talk Show. Again, it is that day of the week. The day of the week when you spend time with the Message Talk Show with host Alex Gordon. So what do I normally say? Call your friends. Call your worst enemies. Call everybody. Get a cup of tea. Get a cup of coffee. Get it out. Come on, go and get that water now. You're not going to take a break this week. You're going to get the coffee, get it now, and come listen to the Message Talk Show. You know why? There are some times in your life when you have to look back because the person you have become today has been influenced by something, someone, or some organization. You didn't just arrive on your own. You didn't just get here all by yourself. And every so often we have to look back. And when we look back, we have memories of things that have shaped our lives. And today, one of those days, we're talking to one of those guests on the show. A gentleman that's been around for some time, a gentleman that has seen the gospel scene shape and reshape, influenced its beginning and its marketing and to what it is today. And he'll be talking to us with his latest book. Now, can I just get you to say hi this morning? Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, Alex. It's a real pleasure to be on your show.
How are you today?
I'm fine. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. That is wonderful, man. That is great having you on the show today to come and talk to us about the book that you've written, Windrush and the Black Pentecostal Church in Britain. So before we bring Roy on, let me just say something to you this morning. Because I know that you have been going through some struggles. I know that you have been going through some moments here that affected our lives. The pandemic is still with us. The pandemic has not gone away, and the government are taking action to somehow limit the spread across the country. But here, guys, here's what I'm saying to you today. No matter what happens, just make sure you keep yourself, your neighbors, and your family safe. And if it means staying inside, then just stay inside. Do what you have to do, because I want to see you tomorrow. I want to see you in my conferences next year. I want to see you live, okay? I want to see you live. So we have to make sure that we stay safe, guys. So just make sure from the Message Talk Show today, you're staying safe. So today we're talking about the Windrush and the Black Pentecostal Church in Britain. What is Windrush? What are we talking about when we talk about Windrush, Roy?
I think we've all now, generally most people now have grown to understand that period in UK history, which has now been deemed or determined as the Windrush period. And it's the period from 1948 with the coming of Caribbeans from the West Indies, as it was then called, to Britain, immediately after the Second World War in 1948, on the strict invitation of the British government to come to England to help develop the country after the Second World War. And that period, from 1948 up to 1960, maybe early 70s, is called or determined as the Windrush period. It's that period of migration when Caribbeans came from the West Indies, as it was called then, to Britain to help Britain develop, reestablish itself after the Second World War.
And when they came, they brought something with them. When Windrush came, when the Caribbeans came to Britain, they brought something with them, something that was not going to stay hidden, something that was not going to stay separate from their lives. Now, one of the things that's been said, and you've talked about it in your book as well, is that when the Caribbeans came to this country, and those who were of faith, they were not received. A lot of people had bad experiences when they tried to go to other churches. Is that correct?
It is correct, but there's a distinction that needs to be made, which is not often said and often acknowledged or even known or know about. The first thing is that most of the Caribbeans or West Indians who came here belonged to a church. They were church-going folks, 80, perhaps even 90% of them. It was just common practice in the Caribbean to go to church on Sundays. So the Caribbeans came with their faith. So when they got here, but even before they came with their faith, the Caribbean community, in terms of faith, could be divided into two distinct categories. The first category, and the majority of West Indians, so many people don't know these Caribbeans, were people from the established churches in the Caribbean. They were Anglicans, Baptists, Methodists. The majority were from the established church. The majority were Anglicans. Then there was another group, a smaller group. They were Pentecostals. Their experiences in Britain when they first came here is distinctly opposite. Those from the established church, naturally, the first Sunday, they went to their local church, and the experience many of them encountered was disappointing. They were shunned, made to feel unwelcome, not particularly acknowledged, and some were even told not to come back because their presence was upsetting the white congregation. That generally is the experience of those from the established churches. Pentecostals didn't generally have that experience. They hardly had that experience because they didn't put themselves through that experience. What Pentecostal did was to look for other Pentecostals. And they then start to hold prayer meetings. They hold prayer meetings in each other's homes and started their churches there. Those are the two distinct experiences of this group of Caribbeans who came to Britain. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Sometimes there is sometimes with the number of streams happening, there is some delays taking place.
Yes.
So they had bad experiences. The ones that belong to the Pentecostal arena didn't put themselves through that, so they separated themselves. But you come into a country that's not used to what we call Pentecostalism. What is, for those viewers out there who don't know nothing about church, what is Pentecostalism? What is it?
Well, generally, as a theology or a practice of faith, it has two many distinctive, but two really distinctive characteristics. One is speaking in tongues. The other is water baptism. And there's a third one called sanctification. I'm not going to go into what they are, but those are distinct characteristics of being a Pentecostal. It's the recognition of speaking in tongues, water baptism, and sanctification. And Pentecostalism as a practice, a faith practice of theology, actually developed mainly in America, in the form of which we generally know it today, although theologically it goes back to the Bible from the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came to the disciples. Jesus had already forewarned them that he would send a comforter, and the Holy Spirit came, and that period of Pentecost, which is a Jewish festival actually, is the biblical origin of Pentecostalism.
Wow. So it was different from what most people in the UK were used to. It's a different expression. It's a different way of communicating the message. So the Caribbeans separating themselves and created their own brand of church. Yeah.
Well, let me just say this a minute, because I don't want to give the impression, and the impression is not that they were a homogenous group of Pentecostals. Right. No, these were little groups meeting in each other's home, part for security, part for friendship, part for the ability to continue to practice their faith. This wasn't an organizational thing.
Right.
It was groupings up and down the country. And don't forget, in the early days, and I'm talking the 50s, there were very few Black Pentecostal, very few Black people in this country. The bulk of Black people started to come, Caribbean started to come in the 1960s, from 1962 onwards, and even then the numbers then were under a million, so still relatively small. So in the 50s and early 60s they were tiny. It was just groupings up and down the country, people meeting in their homes, familiarizing themselves, meeting, sharing, friendship, giving the chance to meet and make friends and practice their faith. And they continue that. Later on, that grouping merged into church organization when they began to rent out halls to worship in, and from there bought their own buildings and then began to establish themselves as a church community.
So they began to organize themselves. It was the organizing of themselves that established what we have today in terms of I think it's the big six that you referred to in the book.
Yes.
The big six.
Yes. Before, at the beginning, the first Black Pentecostal church in this country was the Church of God in Christ, that was formed by a woman, Mother McLachlan, as she affectionately is known, and husband who came later. And after that, there were a raft of other small independent Pentecostal churches meeting first in homes, rented halls, and then buying their own buildings. Later on, this is now early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, the Seventh-day Adventist church community began to establish themselves in this country as Black Seventh-day Adventists. Adventists have been here before. White Adventists have been in the country before. And then also the New Testament Church of God and the Church of God of Prophecy as the two big organizations, church organizations, who really began to establish themselves in the 70s. But prior to that, there were a group of independent Black Pentecostal churches with the Church of God of Prophecy, with the Church of God in Christ, the prominent church.
Hey, just be careful how you tell this history, because some people are going to come back and they're going to say to you, Roy.
Yeah, well, it's there in the book. This is a personal story. Yes. This is a personal account. I lived through all this, and I was at the forefront of it for a whole range of reasons, which I explained in the book, why I had a front seat in what was going on.
So let's take you back then, because it's your personal story. What was it like as a child growing up in this time? You came from a small village in Jamaica into the motherland, so to speak. And as a small kid, you come into this big land. What was it like for you?
Well, it wasn't big. You didn't recognize it as big. You didn't see anything like that. I was coming to my parents. To my parents. Now, this is the interesting thing, is that my grandparents were my parents, because when our parents left us, my brother and myself, we thought our grandparents was our parents. So when I got to England, I was told these are my parents, my mother and father. So I had to relearn the idea of who my parents are.
Stop there, Roy. What do you mean? What do you mean by you thought your grandparents were your parents?
Because we call my grandfather and grandmother Mama and Papa.
Wow.
Like most Caribbeans did, who were left when their parents came to England.
And so there was no explanation to you or constant reminder of who your parents were?
No, they were reminded, because they were constantly sending things for us. And our grandparents would say that. But as a child, you don't recognize, you don't quite understand that. I'm talking 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. You don't recognize it in that way. You don't conceptualize it that way. The nearest people who give you love, care, and support are I know my grandparents. They're mommy and daddy. No, it wasn't called mommy and dad. The mama and papa.
Wow, that's so powerful. So you came here to meet your parents. And what was it like for the very first time for you, meeting them in person?
Well, it's a very foggy memory. Personally, my brother say he remembers everything. I don't remember leaving. I was born in Smithville as they call it in Jamaica, and come to England. I don't remember the drive to Kingston. I don't remember the plane ride. I don't remember from the airport to my parents. I don't remember any of that. To this day, I don't remember that. But I do remember my father taking me to a little kiosk at the top of the street and buying me a bar of chocolate. I remember that distinctly. It's quite extraordinary how the mind works. I remember that above everything, but everything prior to that, I don't remember. Everything forward thereafter, I do remember, and remember vividly. So yes, coming as a young child, meet my parents, and what was life like then? Church, and more church.
Wow. So you were immersed. You were immersed into church life. There was no. Well, I would have imagined that with your grandparents, you would have been going to church anyway. Yes?
We do. Sunday school, it would be in back home. And we were, interestingly, in our village, the church is Baptist. We're all Baptists. My father was Pentecostal, but my grandparents, who we were living with, were Baptists, very prominent Baptists. members at that. Yeah, so it was church. Church was 7 days a week. There were prayer meetings every week, every day. Saturday, we went and visited other churches. Sunday, church started 11 o'clock and finished about 3:30. We go home for an hour and a half, come back to church till about 10:15. Then we had to drive everybody and drop them off home. Some people, we were in North London, and some of our church members lived in Halsden. So we had to drive all the way to Halsden to drop them off. They would feed us and come back home.
What do you mean by you had to drive them home?
No, there's no such. No, actually, that's quite interesting because it just showed the sense of community that existed then. People cared for each other. People looked after each other. Members of the church would pick them up in the morning with a van. It's just a known thing on Sunday morning. Vans were going up and down London, up and down the big cities, collecting people to come to church, and they'll drop them home in the evening, not necessarily in the afternoon, because what used to happen after church is that most people would go to another church member's home for dinner or lunch, as it's called. But in the evening after church, in the night, people were dropped off to their home, because in those days, people wanted to care for each other, wanted to know what happened to people, wanted to make sure that people got home safely. It wasn't all easy as it is today. You could just walk nicely down the street. Some of the place was quite seriously problematic in terms of people's own personal safety.
So because your father is the leader and you're involved in the leadership of the church, you were living that life every day, every week, every Sunday.
That's why I can write the book. I had a front seat at this. And not only that, I played the piano. And in those days, there was only one person in the early days, one person who played the piano in any church, and it was me. So my father used to take me all over to different churches, play the piano. I had a front seat to what was happening.
Wow. That meant, but that must have been good experience, though. You were going to all the churches, playing. Your musical ability was increasing all the time.
Yes, but I wasn't aware of it. All I know is that people put me up on the platform and ask me to play, and I play, and they'll make a lot of noise and think how good it is. And some people come and put money in my shoes, and then ask me to play again later on in the service. And I just did that because you're a child. My father was a preacher, and he'd have his services, go to other conventions, other people's services, bring me along, or they asked for me to come along and play. It was just part of a family, part of my own upbringing and experience.
So did your other siblings have the same kind of experience as you?
Not necessarily that in terms of being at the forefront of church, but we're all part of a family. So we all went to church. We all went to prayer meetings. We all went out on Saturdays to the different assemblies, and we all came back home later. You know, Alex, one of the things I've looked back over the years, I thought to myself, how did I manage to study back in those days?
My God.
Just go to church 7 days a week. How did I do it? And I remember one time at school, I don't know if we used to call our teachers masters in those days. And one of the masters picked up something and asked me something. And I said to him that, I'm having difficulties doing my homework. And he said, look, I suggest, why don't you wake up 4 o'clock in the morning and do your homework then? And I'm convinced that's why I was able to pass my O-levels.
4 o'clock in the morning.
4 o'clock. I used to get up 4 o'clock in the morning and study then. And before I went to school, did my homework then, study then, and that grew into a practice, actually. And that I think was enabled me to succeed academically, if I've ever succeeded academically.
That's amazing. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know where you're joining us from. I don't know where you're listening from, but this is Alex Gordon on the Message Talk Show, talking to Roy Francis of Roy Francis Productions. And Roy is one of the former producers, creators of songs of praise on the BBC. This gentleman has been at the beginning of the marketing of gospel in the UK. Do you remember People Get Ready? People Get Ready? That was an amazing show on Channel 4. Roy, what was that experience like, being part of People Get Ready and Songs of Praise?
Well, everything has a history. And not everybody knows the history of People Get Ready. The history of People Get Ready is actually a service that was conducted at Southwark Cathedral, a Songs of Praise service that was conducted at Southwark Cathedral And it was the first time BBC Songs of Praise has had a predominantly black congregation in its program, and first time its emphasis or the theme of the program was on the black experience and black gospel music. It was so successful, that program, that today it has what we call the biggest postbag. More people wrote in about that program than any other program on Songs of Praise during the time I was there. And mind you, I didn't do it then. I didn't make that program. However, because of that, Channel 4 thought it'd be a good idea to have a gospel series. So Channel 4 commissioned Television South, which was part of the ITV network, to produce People Get Ready. And I was fortunate enough to start working on it as a researcher and ultimately ended up producing it. And of course, it was a mainstay of gospel music. It was a significant moment in this country because it was the first time gospel music of Black Pentecostal Church had mainstream television and a mainstream time on TV. And it was a seminal moment.
Wow, mainstream. So the British population got exposed to British black gospel music in a different environment without going to church. On
mainstream television, at mainstream time.
Yeah. That is amazing. That is amazing. You know, our experiences of the Black Pentecostal churches have all been different. And so why at this moment in time you choose to write this book? Why now?
It's interesting. Like everything else, it has a history, it has a genesis. I was conducting a series of workshops with Marcia Dixon, who I know you know.
Yes.
And I've written a book before. My first book is How to Make Gospel Music Work for You, which was written essentially for gospel artists, how to succeed today in this internet social media age with their music, because record companies is not part of the equation anymore if you're an independent artist. All right. So I wrote that. So I used to do these workshops explaining about this. But in order to explain how to succeed in music, I thought I need to give these young artists a historical background, how this whole music came into being, both from the Caribbean and also from America. And what is the trajectory? What is the development of gospel music? And what I found was that they were so intrigued by all this, they lapped that part up of the workshop, perhaps even more than the practical implications of what I've suggested to them. And I have a publisher friend who's been telling me for a long time, Roy, you really ought to write a book and put down all the knowledge that you have so that others can share from it. And of course, I used to say, yes, of course, I'll do that. And not thinking for a moment I would, because I didn't see myself as a writer. I still don't. But because of that experience in those workshops, I began to write down some of the ideas, and one thing led to the other. Before I knew it, I was 3, 4 months, 5 months into writing the book, and hence the first book. Now, because of that, I got a lot of publicity on the first part of that book. So many BBC radio interviews, television interviews, etc., etc. And I thought to myself, well, I really need to tell this story now, because all I did was hint at the music part of that experience. Now I really want to tell the story. And because it's a personal story and I was at the front, I had a front row seat at this, I thought, well, maybe people may really want to know about this experience, and especially my own family and my own children. I thought this is part of their legacy, this is part of their heritage. And it's all our heritage. So I wrote it on that basis. So hopefully some people might find things in there interesting.
Wow. And you say you're not a writer. You're not you couldn't write.
No, I'm not a writer. I know very good writers. And I wouldn't for one moment suggest. And I read quite a lot. So no. I know very good.
No, okay.
If only I could write. No.
If only you could write.
Oh dear.
So we're talking about the British Black Pentecostal influence on people's lives, and you've just depicted where every day of your life was influenced by church. You were going to church every day, 7 days a week, involved in leadership, playing out.
Yeah.
The influence of the church was not planned; it just happened.
Yes.
It happened at a period of time. Do you think and believe that the church today has the same influence over people's lives?
Well, let me go back. My training is in history anyway, history and politics. That's where my degree is. So everything I want to give a historical context to it,
Okay,
to understand why things are where it is now. Historically, church served the purpose back in those days, two purposes, I think. One was a spiritual purpose. It gave people a chance to worship, pray, practice their faith, and also it was a resource. People could go to church, they could make friends, they could hear news from home, they could meet other people, they could hear what's going on in the country, in the society, at work, how they could overcome some of the problems people were saying. Testimonies are great for that. People used to testify about their experiences, and people would learn from that and adopt some of the strategies. So it had a practical resource-based church in those days. And of course, because it was a community, people looked out for each other, cared for each other. My father used to be called out at night so regularly to go and pray for the sick, wow. go to the airport. Somebody had arrived without their papers or something. And in those days, Pentecostal pastors had major influences. They could go to the airport on the basis of who they were. Their word was enough to let people in. Now, try and tell me who could do that today.
Wow.
So
their word was enough to let people
yes, my father, many times, his words were enough to let somebody in who would come into the country and there was a problem at the airport.
That's amazing.
And those really, the early ones were quite recognized, to be honest with you. Now, the influence today of the Black Pentecostal Church within the Black community and even within the Black Pentecostal Church community has waned. It has waned and it has changed. It has changed because we are living in a much more secularized society, ruthlessly secularized. Secondly, we are now into third, fourth generation of people, youngsters who look at some of the experiences, some of the church practices, some of the theology as not quite applicable to a 21st century Christianity. And they are now challenging, discussing this and saying, well, no, I'm leaving some of that stuff behind because it doesn't work. We're a different kind of people. We're not Caribbean. We're not West Indian. We're now British. Some would even prefix themselves and say Black British, but the Britishness is now a feature which it wasn't in my day. There was no time in my day where Britain was playing any nation in football. I supported Britain, never. Wow. But my children support the English team. Wow. Wow. They support Britain. And I think that's an incredible transformation that has taken place. So the influence is not as strong because it is changing. It's metamorphosing. Where it will end out, I don't know. But we have now new influences. The influence of the society at large. We have the African influences, which are now strong in the Pentecostal church community. The American influence has always been there. It's even stronger in some aspects. So I think there is a melting going on now. And a synthesis, hopefully, will emerge perhaps after I'm not here anymore.
But you just said that there's a kind of negotiation going on with it, with the current generation looking at some of the practice and saying that doesn't fit, it doesn't work now. Now, as long as the discussion has been taking place and negotiating, that's not such a bad thing.
I think it's an excellent thing.
Every generation brings its own interpretation to what went on before.
Absolutely. I agree entirely. I applaud it, actually. But what they must not do, what we must not do is kick away the roots, the foundation on which we are now existing. There are some eternal truth. There are some eternal practices. There are some theological pillars that keeps the faith, keeps us as a faith community intact. We must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, that's the challenge. And I think the more discussion is, the more our academics and intellectuals, our theologians are looking at this and unpicking what's going on and charting for us some possible way forward, rather than everybody's jumping and saying all kinds of stuff all over the place. Then I think we will begin to create this synthesis, but we must come out the other end intact with who we are as Black Pentecostals. Very proud of that, very keen on that, and wishing to extend that forward, and don't think we have to submerge ourselves into something because it looks better than what we have. Invariably, it's not.
Now, that statement you made about recognizing who we are, and that's powerful, because there are a number of people today who can look back and identify themselves, who have an understanding of who they are because of the church practices, because of the discipline, because of everything that they were taught and what they were held back from during that time, and it helped to shape their lives today.
Absolutely. I contend that that generation, my generation, the subsequent generation, brought up deeply in the church, are potentially stronger people. For a number of reasons. One, we were shielded from a lot of what was going on outside because we were closeted in the church. Nothing wrong in that. I think that's quite good. In your formative years, you don't want to get into too much of that stuff out there. Secondly, church was always impinging, impounding, and telling us how important it is to be saved, how important it is to live from sin, how important it is to be educated, how important it is to stand up as who you are. Second or thirdly, we always were encouraged to get to speak, to give testament to God and do something in front of a congregation.
True.
400 people, little 5-6-year-old who go sing a song or read a poetry. What is that for self-confidence? It's absolutely brilliant for self-confidence, for self-esteem. That's where these things are formed. That's where character, that's where psychological strength comes from. Unfortunately, a lot of our present generation don't have these experiences. They don't even go to church. And shamefully, a lot of our Pentecostal church don't even have Sunday schools.
Yeah, that's gone by the way now, isn't it?
Gone by the way. Where are the young children going to learn anything about God from?
Even
though we didn't understand it in those days, we used to sit down in church, we have a Bible, and the Bible used to have those color illustrations. So we used to all look through it, didn't know what's going on. It didn't matter. I can cook now not because an old Black Jamaican Caribbean can cook, male can cook, not because my mother took me over the stove every day. Occasionally she did, but because she cooked all the time. I'm not advocating women must cook. That's not my conversation. But the point I'm making, because she cooked every day, and I was just saying this, I was part of the experience. When it came to a time on my own, the whole cooking thing kicked in. Wow. Because I remember what my mother did. It's the same thing if we're brought up that way in church. Young people are brought up in the church. Don't worry if they understand it. They don't have to understand it. Later the thing kicks in and they're more mature. They have more experience and they can make decisions at that point. My father used to say, boy, I don't have to go to church, whether I like it or not. When I turn big, I'm going to come make a decision whether to reject God. Never forget that.
Hey, well, there's an adjoining statement to that. You know, if you're in my house, you're gonna go to church.
Oh, there's no question. My father said, two bulls don't rule in one pen, and even in hell there is rules.
Hey, I mean, we look back now and we can laugh or we can smile, you know. But I think during that time, there must have been some form of rebellion in our hearts or rebellion in your mind, thinking, my God, man, this is too much.
Of course there was.
Something, you know?
Yeah, of course there was. I wanted to go clubs and parties when I was 17, like every youngster. And I used to sneak out the house. And my father, when he realized I was in, lock up every single door and room. And that's it. You stay outside. You know, of course we wanted to. And they were tough in those days. They're not like now where I am with my children. My children are grown, but more flexible and liberal, obviously, and quite rightly so as well. But Alex, it's a balance. Had it just in one direction. And I'm thankful for that direction rather than a complete free-for-all direction, to be honest with you. But it's neither extreme. There's a balance that needs to be struck between our children as they're growing, given the responsibility, let them fend for themselves, let them learn how society, how life goes, and at the same time being there for them, being a network safety net for when there's a problem. And we must love them completely. And I don't mean just say we love, show love. We were not good at that in our Caribbean community at that generation. They loved us, they never showed it, but then that was part of life. They weren't physical in that sense. They weren't tactile in that sense. We tend to be now, because we've been in Britain a long time now, 65 years now. So we've adopted some good practices.
They loved us, but they never showed it. They loved us, but they didn't express it in the way that we see today.
Yes,
But
that's right.
their understanding of loving us was making sure there's food in the house.
Correct.
To eat, a roof over our head.
Correct. And
that
care.
was their understanding of love.
That was love. And they were absolutely right. To be honest with you, I take that because if you don't have that, which is the foundation of life, what have you got? You end up on the street.
Yeah, because there was no state providing any funding at that time.
No, you couldn't even get a council house, my friend. That's why that generation all had their own homes. They bought their own homes. And it's interesting now what's going on in the Black Caribbean community, because that generation has died. They've left properties worth millions. Millions. If you had a house in Brixton, my friend, in those days, today it's worth 1.5, 1.6 million pounds.
Wow.
And nobody wanted to live in Brixton back then. That's a supreme irony. So the grandchildren now are benefiting from that legacy.
Yeah.
Not only Brixton, in Islington, in Holsden, wherever now, anywhere in London. Just the scale of properties. And that also mean that the churches that generation bought in the early days is a portfolio of very significant properties.
That's true, because when you talk about Black wealth now, you cannot ignore the churches.
Cannot ignore
the portfolio of properties that the churches are sitting on across the country.
Caribbeans are richer per capita than Africans. And it is because of the property that our parents' generation bought and held in time.
Wow. That's amazing. And it wasn't, it happened. It wasn't a strategy that they went to a conference and listened to.
No conference. No. Alex, God bless my father and mother. I have wondered, if I have one regret, and it's only because the book did this, I didn't have the chance to ask my father how comes he was able to buy a house in this country within 3 years of arriving in Britain, knowing where he came from.
Within 3 years.
Within 3 years of arriving in Britain, he was able to buy a house, housing a family of four of us then. Yes, 4 of us then, and my elder sister, 5 of us then. Within 3, and he was working on the railways, laying sleepers. Now, how he did that, I don't know, but I do know it was the partner system.
Wow. Yeah.
It was the partner. Everybody threw a partner. Everybody belonged to a partner. And the partner was a saving club. So everybody threw their partner, and everybody know what I'm talking about, know the term throw. So they had a bulk of money when it came to taking their, quote, hand, that they could deposit on a house. They couldn't go to financial institutions. They wouldn't lend them anything. They couldn't go to banks. They wouldn't lend them anything. So they found a way themselves of financing themselves and the partner. Churches were bought that way as well. Ask Carmel Jones. He'll tell you the whole story of the Pentecostal Credit Union.
Found a way. We found a way to make it possible.
Yes, of course. Necessity is the mother of invention. You need to do something, you'll invent something. How to do it.
Invent it, create it, make it happen. This is amazing. I think, and these are probably some of the things that we're not discussing enough in our communities now for this generation to get their heads around on what took place.
because one of the things we have lost is this notion of independence, self-reliance. We are now becoming a dependent community. We depend on grants, we depend on this, we depend on psychologists, we depend on this person, we depend on, God forbid, that person. And I don't mean to cast any aspersions about anything or anybody. Life coaches, this people, that. Rather than say, who am I? What can I do? How can I pull two people together and put my money together and buy a bicycle? Do you understand? Or buy a camcorder or buy a laptop and use that as a business to start something. No, we've got to get a grant. Let me fill out 27 forms. And then the grant comes with 200 strings attached, and then you have to buy into the political orthodoxy.
You're in the system now, man. You're in the system. You're locked.
Good.
Let me pull a message here from Marcia Dixon. She says, "I'm shocked you sneaked out to go to parties."
Well, who didn't in my generation who belonged to church? Tell me which one didn't.
Yeah, you're still a human. You're still a boy out there.
Absolutely. And 16, 17. Look, I left my parents' house when I was 21. Look, at 19, when I wanted to go out, my father said, you can go out, Roy, but you must come in at 10 o'clock. I'm 19.
You're going to come back at 10 o'clock.
And this is 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I want to go out now, you know. Wow. No, and in our days, you know, nothing starts before midnight. Alex, you're making me sweat, man. Nothing starts before midnight. And the man is telling me I was coming at 10 o'clock, and he said I was coming at 10 o'clock. Oh my God! What should I do? Circumnavigate him.
Let me pull you back in. Let me pull you back to this era now, because one of the things that happened with the young people inside church during the time that we're talking about,
yes,
was that during all the rules and regulations, everything that was going on, they were still going to church. They threw themselves into music. Music became the outpouring of that generation in gospel.
Which it depends what time you're speaking of, because prior to all that, the big thing was education.
Yeah.
The big thing was being educated. And if you look at my generation, probably one after that, we're generally reasonably well educated in terms of formal education, because it was a big feature. Our parents didn't have education, but one of the reasons they came here was so that their children could be educated. Yes. That was a big imperative for them coming here, to their children. So education was a big thing for our. It subsequently isn't, unfortunately. Later on, music came because of the influence of America. And also what was happening in America, some of the successful people, Black people, that early Caribbeans were seeing were those who were successful in music. Yeah. God, it's still the same today, God forbid. It's still the same today. You know, and sports. I mean, you know, and unfortunately sometimes that can perpetuate a stereotype, which is sad. No, we need theologians, we need economists, we need doctors, we need dentists.
But it's not that the theologians and the economists and the journalists don't exist. It's just that they don't get highlighted in our community.
Correct. We don't validate ourselves. That's quite true. Yeah, and we don't support and use our own services. In fact, and that's a whole historical reason, you know as well as I do, where that one is coming from. You know, I've written a book, I think, that a lot of people in our church community would enjoy. I wonder how many people's going to buy it. I think I know. So it was not written on the purchase of sales. It was written as a chronicle, something that exists to somebody sometime in time to come can look back and say, what was it like in that 60s? Oh, this guy Francis wrote something. Let me see what he said. That's it.
That's so true. That is so true. So we're talking about this book, and we must make this book visible now, you know. Windrush,
thank you.
Windrush and the Black
Pentecostal Church in Britain.
we must right to look back and say, right, what happened during that time? This is Roy Francis' perspective on what took place. So talk us through the book then, Roy. What can you expect when you read this book?
No, let me ask you that question, Alex, because you've read the book. You tell me what you got for the book.
Well, I think I like the way it was catalogued. It started with what happened pre the church organizations coming into being. What was happening in the UK? It talked about you coming into the UK. Then it looked at what happened with the organizations, what took place. Then it looked at the people who influenced those churches, how they contributed, the influence from America, how strong that was as well. That was a really strong connection for the Pentecostals in this country when they came from the Caribbean. And then it evolves from the Caribbeans to the Africans. And you can see the shift. And also you explain the shift in music as well, because in Africa, in African churches, there is a pull towards praise and worship.
Yes.
Which is the basis upon which they came to faith, and the music that was around in their time.
Correct.
As opposed to the Caribbeans, who's more R&B style.
Correct. And that's why the two music has diverged and is diverging. And that's why praise and worship is such a feature of African churches. And because African Pentecostal Church is now the biggest of the majority churches, that is now becoming the dominant music within the Black Pentecostal Church community. Not R&B gospel, but praise and worship. And that's why some of the white Christian artists' music translates so easily, as I say in the book, into African churches, and not so much so in Caribbean historical churches, although, Alex, it's changing. I'm shocked to see how much it's changing. I said in the book, I went to a conference, very prominent, I shan't reveal the church, a very prominent Caribbean Pentecostal church. And I was asked to speak at this conference, and they had a praise and worship session before the speakers. And I was shocked. Not one song was a chorus. Not one was a gospel music from America or anywhere else. It was all praise and worship from contemporary British churches. I was absolutely shocked.
Well, you mentioned there a chorus. Now, when I read that in your book, about choruses in churches, and that just pulled my mind back to thinking, this generation know nothing about choruses and raising choruses to start the church service.
No, they don't have no idea what the word raising means. Raise a chorus. Raise means to start a song, to start a chorus. Yeah. I mentioned the book about tracking a hymn, tracking a song. Yeah, these not train tracks or anything. The Americans call it lining. It's somebody repeating the words of a song or a hymn, the first line in the congregation, following it by singing that line, and it goes through the song until it's completed. And one of the reasons were, in the early days, there weren't enough books to go around, and not everybody could read and write. Same thing in America.
Wow. So tracking came into. I always wondered about that.
Yes, that's what tracking is. Yes. Americans call it lining. Same thing. They call it lining. We call it tracking.
Wow, it's amazing. But it's only when you look back you gain this understanding of what happened. When you're living through it, it wasn't the same.
No, it's an experience. That's where historians are good, because historians look back, write and contextualize, and explain why certain things were what they were and why people did what they did.
Because when I look back and I think of the black churches and the Pentecostal movement, I look at them as entrepreneurs of their time.
Yes.
Because the same effort it took to start a church and get your target audience together and do what it takes to make it work would be the same thing you do to start a business. It's no different.
And the interesting thing, they had no experience.
Wow.
They had no experience. They were learning on the job as they went along. They had no experience. None of them went to business school or for that kind of stuff. So most of them was just basically educated anyway. They didn't have the education you and I had.
Wow.
And look what they've left.
It's amazing.
Look what they bought.
It's amazing. But one of the churches that's evolved over the years, that really understood marketing and media, really understood it and took it by the horn, was a church by the name of KICC, Pastor Matthew Ashimolo.
Yes. Well, he raised the bar. He set the benchmark, and it is still the benchmark. In the book, I've actually written how he did this. He did it quite cleverly, actually. He did 3 things. I won't explain all of them because you go and read in the book. It's all there. It's very interesting. Yeah. But
go and get the book, guys.
Yeah.
Go to royfrancis.co.uk and get the book.
One of the first things he did, he used the Christian media in a way that no other church has done or did before Billy Graham. And if you look at what Billy Graham did, and I studied Billy Graham's ministry quite seriously, and I've also done an award-winning program on Billy Graham. Billy Graham used the media, the secular media, in a way that no church in this country, Anglican or established or anybody, used the media before. Matthew then did the same thing. He used the Christian media in a way that nobody had done before. Secondly, he instituted a big conference, a big event, gathering of champions. And there was a third thing that he did, which I won't mention because it's in the book. I want you to go to get the book to find out what it is. But he did those 3 things, and those 3 things were his catapult to success. And that is today the benchmark of success in the Black Pentecostal Church community. We should all take our hats off to Matthew.
Amazing. That he did something that was unknown of in the Pentecostal arena.
Yes.
And the thing as well, and which you mentioned in the book, that conference that he held every year, the Gathering of Champions, was a shifter.
Yes. Yes.
It was a shifter in the Pentecostal arena because people came from all over the world to those conferences.
Yeah. But what he did is what any great marketeer do. They look for all the big boys, the big girls, the big celebrities, because people are drawn to big names. Yeah. T.G. Jakes, Creflo Dollar. Who's the other one? The one who died. What's his name? The one who died, the big one who died. Jackie McCullough. All those, and some of the big African preachers. So if you put all those together, they all have a support base. Yeah. So everybody bring their support base with them, and you've got 10,000 people.
Miles Monroe.
No, the other one who died in America. I can't remember his name now. Okay. I saw him just before he died, strangely enough. Yeah. But these were the big preachers at the time. And of course, he brought the big gospel artists, the Donnie McClurkins of this world. Yeah. So that was a big event. And Matthew thinks big, and he used big resources to propel what he was trying to do. You need money. You need big money to do big things. You can't do big things on small money. It doesn't work. You can do small things on small money. Nothing wrong in that. And everything starts somewhere.
But success breeds success.
Absolutely. But Darnley Road, he was a small church. But by the time he was at Excel Center, that's it. He had taken off. So everything from there onwards now could be big.
Wow. And has anyone surpassed that today? Yeah.
Yes. The Redeemed Church of God. The Redeemed Church of God, led by Pastor Agua, has 800 parishes in this country with about 80,000 members. There's no bigger church organization than that. But he didn't have to use the media in that way, because the Redeemed Church is a big organization in Africa anyway.
Right. It was a big organization in Africa. Hey, today we've been talking to Roy Francis of Roy Francis Productions, talking about Windrush and the Black Pentecostal churches in Great Britain. We've been talking about the influence of the churches, what happened, what took place, how it's impacted people's lives, how it's changed their focus, how it's developed people, how personal development, if you understand personal development, if you understand what takes place in personal development, that young people, young individuals at the time were able to stand up, given opportunities to speak, given opportunities to speak to large audiences, small audiences, and it helped frame the way they think and do what they do. It was a tremendous time when it happened, but it also was hell as well for some people. Because if you imagine this, Roy said every day of his life, he was involved in church. And so despite that, he woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to study. 4 o'clock in the morning, he woke up to study. 4 o'clock in the morning, Roy woke up to study, in education. It was tough. But you know what? Tough times breed tough people. Tough times breed tough people. And hence we have a generation today who look back and think, wow, that's amazing. So ask yourself the question, what's next?
Alex, I'm having a problem hearing you.
Can you hear me? No?
But I think you've... No. Yeah, I got you now. Can you hear me now?
No. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. So what's
Great.
next?
Yeah,
What's next? What's next in this era?
Well, I like writing now. I've got a writing bug, Alex. Alex, I like writing. I got the bug, mate. So there's a whole raft of things now I want to write about. I want to look at some of the things we believe and we take as said and read, but do we know the history of it?
Wow.
Do we know the history of the soul, the concept of the soul? It has a history. Do we know the history of good and evil? It has a history. Everything has a history. So I'm not saying I'm going to write about it, this next book, but those are the things that fascinates me. Some of the things the rapture I was brought up with, and I did not know the concept of the rapture was invented by an Irishman. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah. Now that blew me completely. That actually finished me, and I read that, and then I went into it a little bit more deeply and think, hang on a minute. Now, I used to believe this thing, thinking this was just something that was always there in the Bible. It is in the Bible, but that was it. No. Somebody propagate that idea.
Wow.
And it was an Irishman. Well, that's what I said. Wow. But anyway, those are some of the things. I've got the bug now, so who knows what I'm going to write next. But I think
history.
I think, I like the history part of everything. The history of our churches, the history of I love as a discipline the history of Christianity.
Wow.
It has a powerful, remarkable history.
So we'll
from
be
the
hearing
first century to now.
We'll be hearing a lot more from you then in terms of pushing out more books.
Hopefully, I'd like to. As I say, I've got the bug now, and it's a noble profession, isn't it? Writing.
Right.
Yes.
So we're coming to wow, man, look at you've been having so much fun here, man. We're just being get carried away. Now, what would you want to say? We're talking to 7 million people now. 7 million people across the world watching this show at some point in time. What is it that you want to say to them that's coming out from your book, from all of your personal story? What is it you want to say to them about Windrush and the Black Pentecostal movement?
I don't think I'm in a position to say anything. What I do, I lay things on in the book, and I'm suggesting to people, well, have a read of it. This is a personal story. This is personal recollection. Make of it what you will. You may find something that is useful from it. You may find things that you don't agree with. You may find things you didn't even know, but it's there. The more that we instill in our community scholarship, instill in our community the ability to research and learn and look back and articulate and write down. Even the Bible tells us to write it down. And I think that's what we should be now aiming for. So I don't know if I want to say anything to the world. I wouldn't be so presumptuous to think I can even do that, man. I mean, same thing to my children, yes, my family, and a few people I know, the world. Oh, God help me. If only. No. So here's that book. Please, if people want to find out some of the things I've said, read a little bit more about what I've said, it's there.
Wow. Roy, it's been an amazing conversation with you today, talking to you about what was. And as a broadcaster then, as a marketer, because you were one of the early marketers of British Gospel, as a marketer, a broadcaster, and now you've seen the shift to social media and the digital era that we now live in. So things are much, much faster. Things come to market a lot quicker. What would you say now do Black churches, Black organizations need to do in this time?
Well, a number of things. I want everybody to know, your listeners, your viewers, this is the greatest age. This is just such a fantastic age. The opportunities for communication, for media is unparalleled. It's a democratic age. 2 days ago, the idea that Woolworths is coming back went viral because somebody decided to post that Windrush is coming back. There's no Windrush. That Woolworths, beg your pardon, is coming. There's no Woolworths coming back. But it just shows the power of social media. It shows the power of the communication tools we have. So I would suggest the churches embrace this. Use it as much as possible. If people want to get ahead, both in business and in gospel music or endeavor or in business, today it's about having a following. The more people you have that follows you, the more they will support you. It's a simple equation. It's not about taking your ideas and throwing it, or your product and throwing it all over the place and hoping people buy it. No, those days, it never did happen that way anyway. It was always strategic. It was always clever. It was always thought through. The difference today is that it's now come to the average person. There are people who are making a lot of money on social media with their music, and there's no record company behind them, making so much money. In fact, they don't need a record. I say to gospel artists now, you don't need a record company, because in a record company, for every pound that you have made that company, you get something like 10, 15p back. The rest goes to the record company. Now you make virtually all the money yourself. I'm selling this book at £9.99. If I was with a big major publisher, they're taking 80% of that. Yes. 80 to 90% of that. Apart from my cost of putting the whole thing together, I'm probably getting about 60% of what I make. Now, you don't need a rocket science to know which is better. Now, the volume of what I sell may be less than a record company, than a publishing company. But over time, you can build that, as some of the artists or some of the entrepreneurs online are doing. They're making a lot of money. So churches need to embrace this in bringing people into church. The idea of going on the street corner shouting at that, nobody's going to listen anymore to that. They're listening to that stuff anymore. In fact, I go further in the book. Most young people, before they come to your church, they would have already had an online experience of that church. They go on that online first. We all do it. Before I came on your show, Alex, I checked you out online. I checked the show out online. I want to know what I'm going to. I don't know, should I spend my time with this guy? You do that. We all do that. We all go online to check. Even when we're buying everything now, we go to TripAdvisor, we go to the comparison website, or those who have bought something, and we hear what they have to say. And if 20 reports are negative, we ain't buying it. We ain't going there. Great age. It's a democratic age. It's a wonderful age.
Despite the challenges we're facing, it's one of the most exciting times that we've ever lived in.
Yeah, forget the challenges. That's human endeavor. There will always be challenges. But our parents had challenges that this generation would never know.
Wow.
So let's look at the positive. If that lot could have gotten through at a time when it was just so hard, and now the tide is swimming in our favor, we need to look positively. Forget looking back about, oh gosh, it's so difficult, I can't do this, the racism, this and all them kind of something there. Yes, it exists. Nobody's denying that. But we have the wherewithal, we have the tools, we have so many things. Today they beg you to educate yourself. They pay you to educate yourself. They're colleges. You don't even have to go. You don't have to leave your home to educate yourself. And we don't take advantage of these things. It's just extraordinary.
It's amazing. It's amazing. You can.
I'm on Google. I'm online all the. Listen, man. I learned so many things. Just absolutely ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
Wow. We've got to make use of the time that we're living in now.
There's no excuse, Alex. There are problems. There will always be problems, but we have the wherewithal to overcome these and create opportunities for ourselves, create our own space, create our institutions, become self-sufficient, self-reliant. We always were that type of people. Where this has gone, God knows.
Yeah, we're always a self-reliant.
We always were. We relied on our own efforts.
We worked hard.
We worked hard.
Worked hard.
We looked after our families. I don't want to get into that now. That's broken up so badly. Hence the reason so many of our problems.
Hey.
And we can all put our hands up at that.
Guilty.
Absolutely.
Wow. Hey, Roy, man, this has been an amazing conversation we've had today. Wow, what was just 30 minutes has turned into
Alex.
It's been an amazing conversation. Wow, thank you so much for being on the show today, Ro. It's been amazing. Get the book, guys. Go to royfrancis.co.uk. I've put his details up to make contact with Roy. Roy Francis Productions. You've got his website. You've got his you've got his LinkedIn. There is no excuse, guys. Get in contact with this gentleman because he said he's now got the writing bug. This is a man who said he couldn't write, but now he's got the writing bug. He's now right. So, guys, let me just go to our sponsor. The Message Talk Show is back again, back. You are listening to the Message Talk Show and podcast. Do you believe you have something to share? Do you believe you have something to contribute? Do you have a story to tell the world, to share with your community? Gandhi said, man often becomes what he believes himself to be. If you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. So join us on the Message Talk Show and podcast with host Alex Gordon. Hey guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Message Talk Show today. We had an amazing guest on the show today by the name of Roy Francis of Roy Francis Productions. He put out his heart and he shared his book, guys. So go to royfrancis.co.uk and buy a copy of that book. So guys, look forward to seeing you next week on the Message Talk Show, and just keep watching out for the guests that we have on this show, because I tell you, man, we're going places. We have gone international. We have gone international from the USA to Dubai. So watch out for the Message Talk Show. And as Roy says, we're living in one of the most exciting times, and there is no reason for not doing what you come to do upon this earth. There is no reason for not writing the book. There is no reason for not speaking. There is no reason for not starting the business that you want to start. So thank you for joining us on the Message Talk Show. And let me just pray my one only tune. Miss the show. You got to be on this show.